And they were really interested in what's going on with our nitrogen. And now that we're approaching tassel with our corn crop, and soon soybeans, will be going through flowering. What do we do? Do we have any issues we need to deal with? And of course, Jack Hardwick, our agronomist, did a great job of really outlining what we think we see on the nitrogen side of the corn. Each field is obviously different, and that's one of the things you just can't standardize. But for the most part, the biggest share of the corn in central Illinois is in really good nitrogen shape. We've got some odds and ends fields and spots, but where those wet spots are, we're seeing a lot of just too wet a soil. As soon as it does dry out, the corn is coming back to life a little bit, getting some nitrogen, and we've got a lot of good nitrate readings. So we're not in serious trouble. And as we approach tassel, if we can get into tassel and get through pollination just into that R1 stage, which is, another week or two for a lot of the earlier planted corn, the April planted corn, that means 80% of our N is in the corn plant, and we are almost home free.
So, Ed, right now then, we shift from kind of a nitrogen forecast to what kind of rain and temperature forecast in this next week or so if the crop is kind of through taking a lot of that N up. There's ample moisture, we certainly know, in the soil. Does that lead you to think that still there's an awful lot of yield potential out here in some fields?
So it looks like we have just as much yield potential as last year in a lot of the corn. The caveat to that is going to be that we last year did not have a lot of holes in those fields where it's too wet, just couldn't drain, spots that just wouldn't allow the corn to mature at all. And so those are going to be the only things. So that's going to drag our yields down maybe 10, maybe 20% on an average. But we really have a tremendous crop as we watch the very first fields hit tassel and the corn leaves. We are starting to see some disease move in, and this is probably similar to last year, and we did see some disease start to move in, gray leaf and northern leaf blight. And those are two important diseases that we need to deal with on a field-by-field basis as they hit a specific hybrid that may be susceptible or a little bit of a stress situation, corn on corn maybe. That has been one of the things that we're focused on. But even more so, we're also taking a look at stressed fields and stressed from maybe lack of nitrogen. They're just not, the nitrogen plan wasn't as perfect as that corn crop needed. And we're starting to see some boron deficiencies. With this rainstorms, the boron is flushing out of our system. We need small amounts for our corn crop, but this is when we see boron become very, very important in our production of high-yield corn.
How can you go out there and scout for boron deficiency if you don't want to pull a tissue test, Ed? And what does it mean for this year's crop? Is there any way to rescue it, or is it something the plant will work its way through?
That's a great question. We've been watching this over the last 10 years and taken a lot of tissue tests, and we see that the boron deficiency is occurring in these wet years like this. So that's the first indicator. But the second indicator is as your corn plants go through a tasseling stage, you'll see the silks come out first, and then you'll start to see the tassel push up and try to open it. It'll almost be late. An ideal corn plant that has plenty of moisture will always push that tassel out first and push it up in the air, and then it'll start to silk, and then it'll pollinate. The pollination will still occur in either case with or without boron, but what will happen is you'll have a reduced kernel set and a reduced fill of those kernels. The nitrogen won't be near as efficient. Boron is very important in the efficiency of the N that we do have, so it's going to make a huge difference on the fields that don't have too much N out there. As far as how do we accomplish it, we have a foliar boron product that's been used for the last 20 years. You put a quart on per acre, fly it on with your fungicide or insecticide, whatever's necessary to be treating out there. And last year's data coming off the research farm is in that 7 to 9 bushel range for that quart of boron. And this is exactly the same pattern that we saw in both 2004 and last year in 2014.
So this can kind of be, I guess, kind of a high yield issue then at times, because if there's a lot of water in the ground, maybe the crop's growing. But this is kind of when it shows up, Ed?
That's correct. What happens is boron, it is a negative ion, and it actually doesn't hold on to the soil. It's produced by the organic matter, and it flushes out of the system. So any amounts of water in our system, and it's going to be more mobile and flush out much easier than sulfur or nitrogen, which we know to be very mobile.
Today here on the Agribusiness Noon Show, talking agronomy with Ed Corrigan, Technical Agronomy Manager with BRANDT. Ed, you've met with a lot of producers over the last couple of days. You guys are always out there active and working in fields right now. Or kind of give me your gauge of their opinion of all of this. People are probably a little bit tired of the rain, but are otherwise people still kind of maybe a little bit bullish on what the rest of this growing season could hold for them?
So they're starting to realize that we've got a really good crop year potential. You know, we need to get a little bit of relief from this rainstorm day after day. However, we are sitting in the garden spot in central Illinois, and when we look at the other states and even southern Illinois and northern Illinois. So they are starting to realize and understand that this is not something we need to take lightly, that we've got some little issues with diseases and whatnot. So they're looking to maximize that return and follow that price of corn as it starts to edge up here, as it looks like it's beginning to do. The last thing they're really asking a lot of questions on and have a lot of concern on is soybeans and being able to kill those weeds out there that maybe they didn't get a chance to put their pre-emergent herbicide down on those soybean fields, or they don't have haven't been able to come back with that last post trip. And so that's going to be one of the things that is going to be really important for them to accomplish within the next couple of weeks before we hit into that R3, R4 bean pod fill stage.
So what are your options right now as a grower, Ed, in a pretty wet field or in a soybean field with some weed pressure that might be a little bit bigger than what the label is going to tell you the requirements are for application? What can a producer do there?
So a lot of the growers are starting to add into either their glyphosate treatment, some other residual compounds, and now we're starting to even have to move away from those residuals that are planned and take a look at some of those burners, those products that like Cobra and Phoenix and some of those Blazer Ultra, those things that actually we relied on prior to Roundup Ready beans that would go out there and burn those broadleaves and assist that canopy to develop on the soybean plant. Once we get that canopy, close those rows, we've got a much better chance of maximizing our soybean yields, and it's relying on some of those older chemistries. And for the most part, we'd still love to just ground apply everything because we get much better control. There are some possibilities to do some of that aerially, but the plains are going to be really busy once the weather does give us some breaks.
And Ed, just back to corn here real quick. Have we drowned out any possible rootworm pressure here already this year? Or are those little guys going to swim any better than they have in the past? An awful lot of water.
So it's an awful lot of water, and that's really a good thing. It's drowned a lot of those guys. And it looks to be like a fairly low rootworm pressure. There'll obviously be a field here and there that has built up pressure due to the management the last 10 years, possibly in, heavy corn production and maybe late planted corn. And that's probably where I would focus if I would suggest that we will have some rootworm that will emerge. The beetles are starting to emerge. We've gotten to that heat unit time period. And so if you start to see huge amounts of beetles, we'll really need to get after those fields with some kind of an insecticide to allow those plants to not be silk clipped and go ahead and pollinate. And then that'll also take down the number of rootworm eggs that are laid for the following crops the next coming year. So